I said no at the altar, but my father sold me to the Mafia king anyway. This channel only exists because someone out there is listening. Subscribe and leave a like. And if you feel like it, tell me, from where are you watching this? I said no, not with trembling lips or watery eyes, not with regret or guilt, or the soft hesitation of a girl unsure of her worth. I said it with a voice that cut the air like glass and shattered every future they had crafted for me. No. And then silence. A silence so dense, so absolute, it pressed against my skin like a second layer. The groom, Graham Lancaster, heir to a family older than the Constitution, froze mid-smile. My father's hand, heavy on the small of my back, tensed like a trigger. The crowd, draped in couture, perfumed with wealth and ambition, gasped, like a single organism betrayed. I turned on silk heels and walked away from a man I never chose, and a life that was never mine. I believed, for one foolish heartbeat, that it was over, that I had finally broken the chains. But monsters don't like being embarrassed, especially when they wear suits and sit in Senate chairs. They didn't come for me that night. That would have been too merciful. They waited until dawn, when the high of rebellion wore off and fear crept in like smoke under the door. I was in my room, my last room as it turns out, still wearing the ruined wedding dress, its white fabric smeared with wine and rage. That's when the door broke. Not opened, broke. The sound of wood cracking, heels on marble, gloved hands. No words, no explanations, just the bag over my head and the suffocating smell of gasoline and leather. I don't remember the drive. Only the sound of wind screaming against the van walls and the cold hand wrapped around my wrist like ownership. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time dissolved into dread, and then stillness. The door opened, and I was pulled out into air that smelled of pine and money. The bag came off, and I saw the mansion. Stone, iron, quiet as a graveyard. Behind me, the guards disappeared like phantoms. In front of me, a man waited. Lucian D'Angelo. I knew his name before I knew his face. Everyone did. The kind of man who exists only in whispers, in rumors carved out of bone and sealed in blood. They called him the Ghost King. He was the storm that toppled dynasties, the executioner who smiled while cities burned. And now, he was my owner. I remember the way he looked at me, not with lust, not even curiosity, like I was an equation he'd already solved. He didn't speak for a long time, just studied me, not my face, but my silence, as if he wanted to see how long I'd hold my spine straight. I did, because I knew better than to show fear to a predator. Finally, he spoke. His voice wasn't loud, but it filled the air like heat. You'll stay here, until I say otherwise. I didn't ask why. I didn't plead. That part of me, the girl who thought she could negotiate her fate, died somewhere between the aisle and the back of that van. They led me inside, and the door closed behind me with a sound that felt permanent. The mansion wasn't cold. That would have been easier. It was warm, decadent, almost sensual in its silence. Velvet, mahogany, gold filigree. It smelled like old smoke and darker things. There were no bars on the windows, but it was a prison. A beautiful, lethal prison. They gave me a room, huge, with a fireplace, a balcony, and a bed too soft to trust. Clothes were brought in. Food appeared on silver trays. And yet, no one spoke to me. Not the guards, not the maids. Only him. Lucian came to me the second night. He didn't knock. He entered like he owned the air. I was sitting on the bed, still in the same dress, defiant and afraid and furious. He looked at me like I was a game already lost. I didn't ask for you, he said, but your father's debt was substantial. He offered you. I accepted. I opened my mouth to scream, to fight, to curse, but nothing came out, because somewhere deep, beneath the anger and the shame, I understood. I wasn't a daughter anymore. I wasn't even a woman. I was a token, a possession passed from one cruel man to another. I didn't speak that night. He didn't touch me. He didn't need to. His presence was a form of domination. He stood close enough for me to feel the heat of him, but far enough to let the silence do the touching. And when he left, he didn't lock the door. He didn't need to. The whole house was a lock. The days blurred. I refused to eat. I tore the dresses. I screamed at walls, but nothing reached him. He watched, though. I could feel it, in the chill behind the curtains, in the way the cameras blinked. He was always watching. On the fourth night, I snapped. I threw a crystal vase at the camera, screamed every word I'd been taught never to say. Minutes later, he appeared, calm, immaculate, dangerous. You done? He asked. I wanted to claw his face. Instead, I whispered, why me? He didn't hesitate, because I wanted your father to suffer. and because I was curious what his pride tasted like. I hated him, every molecule of him. But hate, I was beginning to understand, is not the opposite of desire. It's a cousin, a twin maybe, one breath apart. I'm not sure when I started watching him back, studying his movements, his routines. He read late at night, by firelight. He trained with knives at dawn. He spoke 5 languages, smiled rarely, touched no one. And when he looked at me, really looked, it felt like I was being disassembled, piece by trembling piece. I was never meant to survive this world, but I was born inside it, molded by cold halls and colder silences. I was raised to smile at monsters, to bow when spoken to speak only when asked. I was meant to be perfect, untouched, polished. And yet here I was, bruised, breathless, burning, and more alive than I had ever been. I didn't give him what he wanted, not my tears, not my submission, but I gave him something else, my presence, my fire, the truth he didn't ask for. My name is Isadora Moreau. I was born into power but sold like meat. They thought I would shatter, that I'd disappear into silk sheets and silence. But I am still here. I am not a ghost. I am not a girl. I am a weapon. And Lucian D'Angelo doesn't know it yet. But he's already bleeding. He watched me like I was a storm he'd invited into his home, half curious, half ready to be struck. Every time he entered the room, the air thickened, not with words or threats, but with the heavy silence of someone who never needed to raise his voice to command a war. I didn't flinch. Not anymore. My skin had grown over the bruises of fear, and now there was only the echo of resistance tightening my spine. He wanted me obedient. I gave him poise. He wanted me broken. I gave him silence so sharp it could slice bone, but deep inside, beneath the layers of pride and fury, something far more dangerous began to bloom. Curiosity. Not just mine. His too. Lucian D'Angelo didn't ask me questions. He observed me like a puzzle he had no urgency to solve, yet couldn't resist touching. He would come in, stand too close, speak too little, and leave with the taste of my restraint lingering in the room. I hated that my heart noticed the way he moved, the precision in his stillness, the quiet command in his footsteps, and I hated even more the part of me that began to crave the disruption he brought, like a pulse in a room too long dead. The mansion became a mirror. Every corner reflected a version of me I didn't recognize. The girl who once performed politeness like it was survival was gone. Here, I walked barefoot on marble floors, unafraid of what might be watching. I stared back at cameras. I chose the silk robes that clung to me like a second skin, not to tempt him, but to remind myself that I could still feel. And when I passed him in the hallway and he paused, ever so slightly, to look, my body didn't tremble. It warmed. He left books outside my door, always in pairs, one violent, one soft. A chess move of contrasts. I never thanked him, but I read them. He knew I would. One night I slipped a note inside the last page. You still won't win. The next morning a new book arrived. No title. Just one line scribbled inside the cover. I already have. I didn't speak to him until the 6th day. I found him alone in the library, sleeves rolled, fingers stained with ink and cigarette smoke curling around his wrist like a serpent. I didn't knock. I didn't ask permission. I walked in and stood in front of him, daring him to dismiss me. He looked up slowly, and for the first time, his gaze wasn't made of ice. It was heat. Slow burning. Patient. I'm not afraid of you, I said, though the truth trembled somewhere in my chest. I know, he replied. That's what makes this interesting. He didn't touch me. Not once. And that restraint was the cruelest seduction of all. I was used to men grabbing, owning, claiming. But Lucian? He studied. He waited. Like he was letting the hunger grow teeth. And the more he waited, the more I burned. At night, I stopped locking the door. Not because I wanted him to come in, but because I wanted to know if he would. He never did. And that, more than anything, made me wonder who was actually in control. Then came the dinner, my first outside the bedroom. The dining room was a cathedral of shadows. Low light, tall candles, silver that gleamed like sharp promises. He pulled out the chair for me. I didn't thank him. He poured the wine. I didn't drink it. We sat across from each other like opposing gods. He lifted his glass. I met his eyes. Why me? I asked, voice steady. He smiled. Just barely. Because your father values his reputation more than his daughter. That's not an answer. No, he said. It's the truth. I didn't eat, but I watched him, the way his fingers curled around the glass, the way his throat moved when he swallowed. The man was a myth, and yet so painfully real it hurt to look at him. He was beautiful in that way. Fire is beautiful. Devouring, mesmerizing, merciless. When he stood, I stood too. He didn't touch me, just leaned close enough for his breath to trace my collarbone. His voice fell against my skin like silk laced with steel. You can hate me, Isadora. You should. But understand one thing. I don't play games I don't intend to win. I said nothing, because deep down I already knew the truth. This wasn't a game, it was a war. And the battlefield was not marble floors or velvet rooms. It was my body, my voice, my soul. But he didn't know that I had no intention of losing either. I hadn't spoken my name aloud in days, not because I'd forgotten it, but because here, in this place of velvet cages and silent wars, names held no weight unless spoken by the right mouth. And his, Lucian's, had yet to say mine with anything less than possession. Isadora. When he said it, it sounded like a secret he hadn't decided whether to keep or destroy. I found myself listening for it in the quiet, wondering if hearing it again would feel like being claimed or set free. He passed by my door that morning, slow, deliberate, as if daring me to emerge. I waited until the echo of his footsteps dissolved, then stepped out barefoot onto the chilled floor, each step a quiet rebellion. The hallway stretched like a corridor of decisions not yet made, every shadow a memory I hadn't written. The air tasted of coffee and gunpowder. I followed the scent. He was in the solarium, sunlight fractured across his face like stained glass cutting through a sinner. His shirt sleeves were rolled again, exposing forearms laced with power and precision. He didn't look up. I didn't speak. We just existed in the same breath for a while. The silence between us thick with questions neither of us wanted to be the first to ask. I stood by the doorway, arms crossed, spine straight, heart betraying me with its pace. Then he said it. My name. Not loud, not soft, just real. Like it belonged there in his mouth all along. I didn't flinch, but something in me shifted, subtle and seismic. You're not just angry, he said, still not looking at me. You're starving. For something real. I should have walked away, should have let the silence win, but I stepped closer, just once, just enough to feel the heat from his skin wrap around mine like a question. I didn't answer. He didn't ask again, and still, we understood each other in that aching, brutal way only two damaged things ever could. I took the chair across from him, not waiting for permission. He finally looked at me, and in that gaze was every threat, every promise, every unspoken yes. The sun moved. The clock ticked. The air thickened. But we didn't move. We didn't need to. Lucian D'Angelo didn't need chains to bind me. He just had to look at me like that. And I, guilty as sin and proud of it, let him. Because deep inside the hurricane of hate and hunger was a truth neither of us dared to voice. We were already choosing each other. Wordlessly, recklessly, irrevocably. The door to my room no longer felt like a boundary. It was a threshold, thin as breath, thick as want. I stopped locking it. Not because I trusted him, but because I trusted myself. If Lucien D'Angelo wanted to take something from me, he would do it in the open. And I would watch him do it. That night, the house was too quiet. The kind of quiet that stretches and coils around the skin. I stood by the window, watching the trees shift under moonlight, my reflection caught in the glass like another woman entirely. I didn't recognize her anymore. She wasn't scared. She wasn't meek. She was waiting. For something she wouldn't name. For him. He came in without warning. No knock, no footsteps, just presence. Like the room exhaled, and he stepped into the space that breath left behind. I didn't turn. I didn't have to. I could feel him behind me, the heat of his gaze, the weight of his restraint pressing against the back of my neck like a dare. The silence stretched. Then he spoke, low, careful, deliberate. You're not running. I tilted my head, eyes still on the dark, on the trees, on the lie of distance. Maybe I want to see what happens if I stay. He moved closer, so slow I felt the shift in the air before I heard his breath. You're not afraid of me anymore. I never was. I lied, too beautifully for it not to be true. When I finally turned to face him, I was already shaking inside, not from fear, but from the unbearable intimacy of being seen. He wasn't looking at my body. He wasn't looking at my mouth. He was looking straight into the part of me I kept chained beneath 1,000 performances. I hated how much he saw, and I loved it. That was the sickness. That was the hook. He reached out, slow as sin, and brushed a strand of hair behind my ear, his fingers grazing skin like a promise laced with poison. You think this is a game? I whispered. He smiled, not cruelly, but like someone who's already seen the end of the story. No, I think it's a war. And I think you're starting to enjoy the fight. I didn't answer. My lips were parted, my breath unsteady, my heartbeat drumming secrets against my ribs. He didn't kiss me. He didn't have to. The space between our mouths pulsed with something louder than contact, louder than sex, louder than surrender. And when he finally stepped back, when he walked away without touching anything more than a single hair, I felt the loss like a scream in my bones. I was no longer captive. I was a soldier. And I had just chosen my battlefield. Oh, ChatGPT Disa. The morning after he didn't kiss me felt louder than the night before. My skin still remembered the ghost of his fingers. My breath still curled around the heat he left behind. I woke up with the sheets twisted around my thighs, and my mind wrapped in something worse than desire: anticipation. Every second I spent without seeing him stretched like silk pulled too tight. I showered slowly, letting hot water burn away the hunger he hadn't touched. But it didn't leave. It deepened, as if his absence had teeth, as if he was still inside me without ever entering. When I dressed, I chose something soft, bare skin on silk, vulnerable and deliberate. I wasn't trying to seduce him. I was preparing for war. He was already in the dining room when I arrived, leaning back in his chair, reading something I couldn't see, his glass untouched beside him. He didn't look up when I walked in. He didn't need to. He knew I'd come. I sat without being invited, poured myself water with hands that didn't shake, and stared at the man who could unravel me with silence alone. Minutes passed like hours. He turned a page. I bit into a strawberry just to make a sound. "You're not going to speak?" I asked. My voice was calm, sharp, a blade dipped in honey. He looked at me then, and I swear the room shifted around that gaze. "You already know everything I'd say. Try me." His eyes dropped to my mouth, slow and unapologetic. "You're dangerous when you want to be." I smiled. "And you're predictable when you think you're in control." It hung there between us, not an insult, but a flare. He set the paper down. His fingers tapped once on the wood, a rhythm I would memorize later, when I replayed this moment in the dark. "You think I'm predictable? I think you want me to think you are." He laughed, not loudly, but it cracked something open, and I wanted to crawl inside that sound and make it mine. He leaned forward then, elbows on the table, voice like smoke curling around a confession. "What do you want, Isadora?" I didn't answer, because I didn't know if he meant right now or in the end. And either way, the truth would have sounded too much like need. Instead, I stood, walked to him slowly. His eyes followed every step like they were hands. I stopped just behind him, bent low, lips near his ear, my breath a secret I hadn't decided to keep. "You'll know when I take it." Then I walked away, not fast, not afraid, and not for long, because every step I took felt like a countdown. And when he finally came for me, I wanted him starving. The invitation came in the form of silence. No summons, no command, just a dress laid across my bed, black, silk, sleeveless, a slit running up one thigh like a challenge whispered against skin. I touched it like it might burn. It did. Not with heat, but with meaning. Putting it on wasn't obedience. It was choosing to step into the fire and see if I could make it mine. I wore it without hesitation, without asking where I was going or why. I didn't need to ask. He knew I would come, and I hated how right he was. The hallway outside my room stretched long and breathless. He was waiting at the bottom of the stairs, dressed in black on black, power poured into tailored lines. His eyes swept over me like a secret prayer, not hurried, not hungry, just inevitable. I didn't speak. Neither did he. He simply held out his hand, and I gave him mine like it was always meant to be there. We walked through the house like a procession of ghosts, past locked doors and unspoken stories, until we reached the car. The ride was quiet, dark windows blurring the outside world into nothing but shapes. I felt the distance stretch between us, taut and electric. His hand brushed against mine once on the leather seat, a whisper of touch that said everything louder than a scream. I didn't move, neither did he. The restraint was a scream in itself. When we arrived, the air smelled of power and something older. Danger, maybe, or history soaked into marble. It was a private club, the kind that didn't need a name. He led me through its doors like I was something rare and dangerous, like he was proud or warning them. The room was full of men in suits and women in diamonds, but all I felt was him. His presence wrapped around me like smoke, anchoring me in the middle of a storm no one else could see. He didn't introduce me. He didn't have to. They looked at me like they were guessing whether I was a weakness or a weapon. He looked at me like I was both. I stood beside him, unclaimed but undeniably his. And when he placed his hand on the small of my back, just a touch, just a pause, it felt like the kind of possession that wasn't about owning, but warning the world not to try. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Every move, every glance, Every breath I took was a declaration. I wasn't just surviving here. I was learning, becoming. And the man beside me wasn't just my captor anymore. He was becoming something far more dangerous. Mine. He gave me a choice, or at least the illusion of one. We stood in a room carved from shadow and silence, the soft hum of music from below rising like a heartbeat beneath the marble. I felt his eyes on me before I turned, that quiet gravity he carried pressing against the back of my neck. Not possessive, just aware, always aware. "You can go," he said, voice low even. "No guards, no tricks, doors open." I didn't answer. I didn't move. Because it wasn't a door he'd left open, it was a line. And I knew the moment I crossed it, I would never be the same. I turned to face him, chin high, spine steady. "Why now?" He studied me for a long breath, then another. "Because I want to see what you do when no one is watching, who you become when you think you're free." My chest rose, tight and slow. I've never been free. "Then maybe it's time you decide what that means." He stepped back, giving me space that felt like both a gift and a dare. And then he left me there, in a room with an open door and a question still burning in my throat. I didn't walk out. I didn't even reach for the handle. Instead, I sat in his chair, drank his wine, and lit the cigarette he'd left behind. It tasted like control, like defiance, like me. Because what he didn't understand yet, what I hadn't fully realized until that moment, was that my staying was no longer about him. It was about me. About reclaiming the pieces of myself I'd let others write for me. If this was a game, then I was no longer the prize. I was the player. Later, when I returned to my room, the fire was lit, the bed untouched. But something had shifted. Not in the furniture. In me. I could feel it in my breath, in the way I walked across the floor, barefoot and unafraid. I wasn't waiting for him anymore. I was becoming the kind of woman he would have to follow. He came hours later, silent as always. I didn't look at him, just spoke into the firelight. "What would you have done if I'd left?" He didn't lie. "Burned everything until I found you." I turned then, slowly, met his gaze. There was no mask this time, no smirk, no shield, just him, raw and real and dangerous in a way that didn't scare me anymore. "Then maybe I should have walked out," I whispered. "So you'd know how far you're willing to go for something you never meant to want." He didn't touch me, but his silence did. It wrapped around my ribs, filled my lungs, marked me. And in that quiet, I knew. I wasn't a guest here. I was the storm he'd let in, and I had no intention of leaving. It happened in the dark, not with violence, not with seduction, but with something slower, deeper, almost reverent. The house was asleep, the world outside wrapped in stillness, and I, restless in the quiet, couldn't breathe under the weight of everything I hadn't said. I found him in the library, again. He was always there, where the light was low and the shadows made everything honest. He didn't startle when I entered. He didn't look surprised, as if he'd been waiting, as if he always knew I would find him when silence finally broke me open. I stood in the doorway, bare feet on cold stone, arms folded against a chill that wasn't in the air but inside me. He looked up slowly, one hand resting over an open book, the other curled near a glass of something dark and slow burning. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. I shook my head. "Too many ghosts." "Yours or mine?" "Both." He closed the book, sat back, waited. I moved closer, each step heavy with something I couldn't name. I didn't sit. I stood in front of him, the fire casting flickers of gold across my skin, and then I spoke, quietly, carefully. I was 6 the first time I realized I didn't belong to myself. His eyes didn't waver. Not once. I kept going. My father told me to smile for a camera I didn't want to face, and when I said no, he smiled at me like I was a broken toy, like I needed fixing. I paused, breath catching on the edge of memory. He taught me early that love was something earned through silence, that beauty was currency, that obedience was survival. My voice didn't shake, but something inside me did. Every time I wore the right dress, said the right thing, stood in the background just enough to be noticed but never enough to threaten, I thought I was winning. I thought I was safe. Lucien said nothing. He didn't move, but his stillness was the kind that wrapped around me like armor. I lowered my eyes. I thought I was powerful because I could play the game, but I was just a doll in a prettier cage. My hands trembled. Until I said no. There it was, the fracture, the wound, the truth I hadn't even spoken to myself. When I looked up, he was already standing, so close, and yet still not touching. His voice was low, deep, soft enough to bruise. "You're not a doll anymore." My eyes burned. My throat ached. "Then what am I?" He stepped closer, one hand lifting, but stopping, just at the air near my cheek. You're a woman who set fire to her own leash and walked away from the ashes. I closed my eyes, not to hide, but to breathe. And for the first time, it didn't hurt, because someone had seen the ruin and didn't look away. It wasn't a kiss, not at first. It was breath, his, crashing softly into mine. It was silence breaking like a fever, hands hovering inches from skin that had forgotten how to flinch. We stood there, suspended in the pause between fear and want, in the tension of two people who had lost too much to touch without consequences. I should have stepped back, should have drawn a line, a breath, a boundary, but all I did was stay, and that was enough. That was everything. His hand moved first, fingertips brushing the side of my neck, so gently it made my knees threaten betrayal. My breath hitched, caught between protest and permission. Then the other hand, lower, settling at my waist, grounding me as if I might vanish if he let go. He didn't rush. He didn't dominate. He simply waited, let the air between us answer. And when my fingers found his shirt, clutching the fabric like a lifeline, I knew we'd already crossed whatever line we thought we were guarding. His mouth found mine in one slow, devastating descent. Not with force, but with intent. With hunger wrapped in reverence, with restraint sharp as a blade pressed to skin. I wasn't kissed. I was undone, and I let it happen. I welcomed the ruin. The kiss deepened like a secret no one else would ever hear. He tasted like dusk and danger, like something too dark to be holy, but too honest to be a lie. I didn't moan. I didn't whisper. I breathed into him like a confession, like maybe I'd been waiting for this sin my entire life. He pulled back first, not far, just enough to look at me, our foreheads nearly touching, both of us breathing like we'd run through fire. "Tell me to stop," he said, voice ragged. "And I will." My fingers slid up his chest, rested over his heart, felt it, solid, fast, real. "I don't want you to." He kissed me again, harder this time, the need sharper now, tempered only by the way his hands still held me like I was something breakable. And for a moment, for just that moment, I forgot I was supposed to be surviving him. I wanted him, not as revenge, not as rebellion, but as truth, raw, dark, and impossible to unfeel. When he finally stepped back, just enough for the air to rush in between us, I felt the ache of absence like a bruise forming in slow motion. "This changes everything," he said. I nodded, breathless. Good. Because I wasn't here to stay the same. I was here to burn. And he had just struck the match. The night didn't end with the kiss. It began there, unraveling with the kind of quiet that feels louder than any scream. I didn't go back to my room. I didn't ask where we were going. I followed him through the house like the air belonged to us, like every shadow had already memorized our names. When he opened the door to his bedroom, he didn't touch me. He didn't have to. I walked in on my own, barefoot, breathless, and burning. The door closed behind us with a softness that felt final. I turned to face him, and he was just standing there, watching me the way someone watches a storm roll in, with reverence and readiness, with the quiet knowing that nothing will be the same when it's over. I moved first, slowly, like a question he already knew the answer to. My hands found the edge of his jacket, sliding it from his shoulders with a control I didn't know I had. He didn't stop me. He just watched. Let me lead. Let me take. It was a kind of power I'd never held before, and it made me ache. When I reached for his shirt, his hands caught mine, not to stop, but to still. "Are you sure?" he asked, voice low, breath warm against my lips. I nodded. I've never been more certain of anything in my life, and I meant it. Every word, every trembling inch of me meant it. Clothes fell in whispers, skin met skin like a secret being confessed. There was no rush, no dominance, just exploration, reverence, the sacred kind of slow that only comes when both people have already surrendered without saying the words. His hands traced every part of me like he was memorizing, not taking. My breath stuttered under his mouth, my body arching into him, not in submission, but in recognition, like maybe we'd always been meant to find each other in the dark. He didn't say my name. He breathed it, over my collarbone, against my shoulder, into my mouth. And when I moaned, quiet, broken, real, he stilled for just a second, forehead pressed to mine, as if holding himself together took more strength than breaking wood. I kissed him harder, deeper, pulled him closer, and when he finally moved inside me, it wasn't pain, it was release, like every locked door in my chest flung open at once. We moved together, not like lovers, not like enemies, but like something older than both, like fire and fuel, like hunger and heat. When it ended, when we collapsed into each other, slick with sweat and silence, I didn't speak. I didn't need to. He wrapped himself around me, not as a shield, but as something softer, something almost human. And for the first time in a life built on performance and punishment, I fell asleep feeling wanted, not used, not displayed, just chosen. I woke before him. The room was still, soaked in gray morning light and the scent of sleep-warmed skin. His arm was draped across my waist, heavy with possession, but his grip was soft, instinctual, protective. I didn't move, not because I was afraid, but because I wasn't ready to break whatever spell had settled between us in the night. I studied the way his chest rose and fell, the tension still carved into his features even in sleep. This man, so feared, so controlled, looked almost peaceful with his guard down, and I let myself look, really look, at the man beneath the name, at the pieces no one else was allowed to see. My fingers moved on their own, tracing a line along his collarbone, light as breath. He stirred but didn't wake. I could have slipped out then, wrapped myself in silence, and vanished into another version of the morning. But I didn't want to. I wanted to stay in this fragile, dangerous peace we'd created. A moment carved out of chaos, a pause before the world resumed its shape. Eventually, he opened his eyes, slow and sharp, like a man who never really sleeps. His gaze found mine instantly, unblinking, not surprised, not hesitant, just there, anchored in me like a vow. "You stayed," he said, voice thick with sleep and something deeper. "So did you," I whispered, lips brushing the edge of a smile. We didn't speak more. There was no need to name what had already changed, but something had, irrevocably, not just between our bodies, but beneath them, in the silences, in the parts of us we hadn't touched but had started to trust. We rose without ceremony, dressed in the hush of shared breath and stolen glances. When I stepped out of the room, the mansion didn't feel like a prison anymore. It felt like a battlefield I had survived, and won. That day, he didn't keep me hidden. He brought me into the world that once only watched me from behind closed doors, into meetings, into his inner circle. The guards looked, the men in suits whispered, but none of them dared speak what they were thinking. Not with the way he stood beside me, hand on my lower back, presence wrapped around mine like a blade sheathed in velvet. I wasn't decoration. I wasn't leverage. I was being claimed in the only language this world respected, power. And Lucien, for all his darkness, made it clear with every glance, every pause, every touch so brief it made my breath stall. This wasn't a game to him anymore. It was something more, something real. And for the first time I felt it too. Not fear, not survival, but belonging. The kind that whispers, "You're no longer alone, you're his, and somehow, impossibly, he's yours." The first time he brought me into a negotiation, he didn't warn me. He didn't prepare me with whispered strategies or stage direction. He simply looked at me over his glass that morning, eyes sharp, mouth unreadable, and said, "Come with me." I followed without asking. Not because I was obedient, but because I wanted to know what power looked like through his eyes, what it felt like to stand beside him, not as a possession, not as a pawn, but as something chosen. The car ride was quiet, but not cold. His fingers brushed against mine on the seat between us. Not an accident, not a promise. Just presence, just heat, just enough. When we arrived, it was a private room in the back of a marble-wrapped restaurant, dimly lit, silent like a confession waiting to be spoken. 3 men were already seated, all older, all calculating. They looked at him the way prey looks at fire, trying to convince themselves they're not already burning, and then their eyes shifted to me. Some flicker of surprise, of curiosity, maybe even doubt. Lucien didn't flinch. He took his seat. I took mine beside him. No introductions, no explanations, just the weight of my presence folding into the shape of theirs. I kept my face unreadable, my spine straight. I watched them, and I knew, if I blinked too slow, they'd smell blood. They underestimated me. He knew they would. That was the play. He let them talk, let them test, let them believe they had room to breathe. But I was the storm in the corner of their vision, the shift in the atmosphere they didn't account for. When one of them asked if Lucien was losing his edge, if bringing a woman into the room was a distraction, I didn't wait for him to answer. I leaned forward, slow, deliberate, voice soft and clear. "It's not distraction, it's evolution. And I'm not here to be seen. I'm here to remember everything you say." There was a pause, one of those beautiful, fractured silences. Lucien didn't smile, but I saw it in his eyes, the flicker of pride, of satisfaction, of something deeper. I had passed the test he never told me I was taking. When we left, he held the door for me, not out of politeness, out of power. Because in his world, showing who you protect is the loudest declaration a man like him can make. In the car, he didn't speak for a long time. Then, without turning, he said, "You changed the game today." I looked out the window, heart steady, voice calm. "No, you just finally let me play." And in that moment, with the city blurred beyond the glass and his hand closing over mine like a vow unspoken, I realized I wasn't beside a king. I was becoming something else entirely. A queen who didn't need a crown, just a name they would learn to fear. It happened in the hallway outside the war room, just past midnight. I'd gone to find him, drawn by instinct or something more dangerous. The kind of pull you don't question when it comes from the person who's already inside your blood. The lights were low, shadows stretched long over marble, and the silence was absolute, until I heard it. The thud of a body against the wall, a muffled cry, my name, low and laced with panic. I ran, faster than I meant to, faster than fear. When I turned the corner, I saw the man, one of Lucian's own, his hand twisted in my arm like he had a right to touch me, like I was something owed. He never saw Lucian coming. There was no sound at first, just the blur of movement, a shadow moving through shadows, and then the crack of bone. One hit. Clean. The man dropped. Blood pooled too quickly on the floor. Lucian stood over him, not shaking, not shouting, just breathing hard, chest rising with something far darker than rage. Possession, protection, the kind of fury that says you touched something sacred, and now you'll pay with everything. I should have been afraid. I wasn't. I walked to him, slow and calm, like he wasn't dripping violence at my feet. I placed my hand on his chest. He looked down at me, eyes wide, feral. "He touched you." It wasn't a question. It was a wound. I nodded once. "He's not breathing," I whispered. Lucian didn't flinch. He shouldn't be. My fingers curled into his shirt. "You'd kill for me." "No," he said, voice rough with truth. "I'd kill the world if it meant you stayed whole." We stood there in the aftermath, the scent of blood rising like smoke, and I realized something that terrified and thrilled me in equal measure. I wasn't his weakness. I was his limit, the line no one was allowed to cross, and he had drawn it in flesh. The guards arrived too late to matter. He didn't explain. He didn't have to. They dragged the body away without question. I watched it disappear down the hall, but my eyes stayed on Lucian, on the man who had turned from predator to protector with one broken breath. Later, in his room, we didn't speak of it. He undressed me slowly, not with hunger, but with reverence, like I was still shaking, even if I wasn't. Like he needed to make sure every inch of me still belonged to me. And when he held me that night, arms wrapped so tightly around my waist I could barely breathe, I didn't fight it. I sank into him like I'd found something I'd been searching for in the wrong places my entire life. Safety. Not the kind built on walls or distance, the kind that bleeds with you, burns for you, kills for you. He kissed me in public like it was war, like he wanted every man in that room to feel it, not just see it, not just suspect it, but know, down to the marrow, that I was his, and more than that he was mine. It didn't start with the kiss. It started with the entrance. We arrived late, deliberately, the crowd already settled, the air thick with money and tension. He walked beside me in silence, hand resting low on my back, possessive but not forceful. A signal. I wore black, sleek, lethal, like I belonged there, like I wasn't afraid to be looked at anymore. And I wasn't, not because I'd stopped fearing what they saw, but because I had nothing left to prove. They all watched as we crossed the room. Politicians, criminals, men who thought they knew power. But their eyes didn't linger on him the way they used to. They watched me now. Me, the girl who was supposed to stay quiet, to be hidden. I felt their stares and met every single one, unapologetic, unmoved, until we reached the center, where the most important men stood. Lucian didn't shake hands. He didn't offer pleasantries. He simply turned to me, curled one finger beneath my chin, and tilted my face toward his. I barely had time to breathe. His mouth met mine with precision, not sweetness. This wasn't affection. It was declaration. There was nothing gentle in the way he kissed me. It was hunger wrapped in control, fire sealed behind his teeth, the kind of kiss that doesn't ask permission. It takes space. And when he pulled back, slow and deliberate, his eyes never left mine. Not once. Not even to gauge the room, because in that moment, they didn't matter. Nothing else did. He turned then, calm, unaffected, and began to speak to the men around him about power, territory, numbers, I didn't need to understand to know he already owned the room. I stood beside him, lips still tingling, spine steady. I didn't touch my mouth. I didn't fix my expression. I didn't need to reclaim my composure, because he'd just handed it to me, in front of everyone, like a weapon. Later, as we drove home, I stared out the window, fingers resting over my lips. That was for them, I said softly. He didn't deny it. It was for us, he answered. And maybe he was right. Maybe that kiss wasn't about show or strategy. Maybe it was the first moment we'd stopped pretending this was anything less than a war we were both willing to lose, or win, together. And when he reached for my hand in the dark, threading his fingers through mine without a word, I didn't let go. Because that kiss wasn't the climax, it was the warning. The world had seen it now, and it would never unsee what we were becoming. He came back like a ghost I hadn't buried deep enough. My father, the man who'd sold me like a debt, a problem, a stain. I knew he'd return. Power doesn't vanish. It waits, rotting in silence until it can rise again. The message came in the form of a meeting request. Not from him directly, of course, but from someone in his shadow. Lucian read it in silence, jaw tight, eyes sharp with calculation. He handed me the note without a word. I didn't ask what he planned to do. I only asked when. We met him in a private lounge downtown. Glass walls hiding the sky and a table too polished to hold anything real. He stood when we entered, as if civility could erase the transaction that had stolen my name from his mouth. Isadora, he said like a claim. I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. You lost the right to say my name the day you sold it. Lucien didn't speak, but I could feel the tension in him like a second heartbeat. My father turned to him, too comfortable, too composed. You've made quite the display of her. Impressive, but dangerous. Only to men like you, Lucian replied, voice calm, razor-edged. Men who mistake value for ownership. My father's mouth twisted. You think she loves you? He asked, but the question was for me. I leaned forward, slow, deliberate. I think I learned what love is by surviving yours. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It pulsed. My father tried to recover, reaching for power like a reflex. You were never meant for this world, Isadora. You don't belong here. No, I said, and my voice didn't shake. I was never meant to belong to yours. Lucian's hand found mine under the table, a quiet anchor. My father's eyes narrowed. You'll come back. You always do, because you're still mine. I stood then, every inch of me steel wrapped in silk. I'm not yours. I never was. You just kept me afraid enough not to notice. He didn't follow when we left. He didn't call after me, but I felt the war begin the moment that door closed behind us. It wouldn't be loud. It would be slow, silent, strategic. And Lucian was already planning the burn. In the car, I stared ahead, heart steady, voice low. He'll try to destroy you for this. Lucian's grip on the wheel didn't falter. Let him try. He created me. He'll recognize the ruin I bring. I turned to him then, touched his jaw, kissed him soft and slow like a promise sealed in breath. Then let me help you end him. His smile was barely there, but it was real. You already have. And in that moment, I knew. This wasn't just my fight anymore. It was ours. And I would not be the girl left behind again. I was the fire at his side, and we were just getting started. He didn't raise an army. He dismantled one, quietly, precisely, piece by piece, like he was peeling away the skin of my father's empire with bare hands and no rush. Power doesn't always roar. It whispers, and Lucian had mastered the art of speaking in silence. The first blow came in the form of exposure. Bank records, secret alliances, leaks that bled slow but deep. The press fed on it like wolves, but none of them could trace the hand behind it. Lucian moved in shadows, letting the world watch my father unravel without ever saying his name. I watched too, but I didn't smile. Not yet. Because vengeance wasn't satisfaction. It was strategy. It was control. I sat beside Lucian in meeting after meeting, our fingers brushing beneath the table, subtle, steady. He gave no orders. He offered no threats. He simply removed options until my father had nowhere left to turn. The men who once worshipped him turned cold. The ones who feared him now feared what came after. And Lucian, calm as winter, moved forward without flinching. He never gloated. He didn't celebrate. But I could feel the shift in him, deep and quiet. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about closure, about giving me the ending I was never meant to have. One night, we stood on the balcony, the city glowing beneath us, and I asked, "How do you know when it's enough?" He didn't answer right away, just slipped his arms around my waist from behind, his chin resting on my shoulder. "When he feels what you felt," he murmured, powerless, invisible, left behind. I turned in his arms, looked up into eyes that no longer scared me. Then promise me you won't become what he was. His jaw tightened. His hand cupped my cheek, thumb brushing beneath my eye. You already saved me from that. But the war wasn't over. Not yet. My father still held one card, and Lucian knew it. Influence. The kind that didn't die in headlines. It died in silence. So Lucian arranged one final move. A meeting. Just him, my father, and a single envelope. I didn't ask what was inside. I didn't need to. All I saw was the way my father left that room. Hours later, head down, face pale, silence clinging to him like shame. He didn't speak to the press. He didn't retaliate. He disappeared. When Lucian returned, I met him at the door. No words, just the knowledge that it was done, over. The ending he promised me, delivered not in blood, but in exile. And when he wrapped me in his arms, mouth against my temple, breath steady and sure, I felt it for the first time. Not just safety, not just peace, freedom, the kind that only comes when you've watched your past collapse and didn't flinch. The kind that tastes like victory, warm on the tongue of a woman who is no longer running, but rising. The silence after a war is different. It's not peace. It's a stillness that waits, breathless, for what comes next. And I felt it in Lucian, in the way his eyes stayed sharp even when the world had finally gone quiet. He was watching something I couldn't see, calculating angles in conversations that hadn't yet begun. I asked him once, softly, if he knew how to rest. He looked at me like I'd said something foreign. Maybe I had. Rest was not something men like him were taught, not when survival demanded motion, not when victory came with a price tag of sleepless nights and constant control. But I could feel the weight settling on him. It lived in his shoulders, in the way he moved through the halls without speaking, in the way he touched me like I was the only softness left in a world built from edges. And still, I worried. Not about his love. That had become a certainty, quiet and constant, like breath. I worried about the war inside him, the one that hadn't ended, the one he didn't know how to walk away from. Because when you've lived too long in the dark, even the light can feel like a trap. One night, I found him on the rooftop, standing at the edge, not close enough to fall, but far enough to feel the wind. He didn't look back when I came up behind him, just said, "Do you ever wonder if this is all there is?" My heart stilled. The silence, he nodded. The waiting, the not knowing what to protect anymore. I walked to him, slow and steady, and slid my hand into his. You protect us. You protect me. He closed his eyes. And what if I go too far trying to keep you safe? I turned to face him, fingers curling around his jaw, grounding him. Then I'll pull you back, just like you did for me. His eyes opened then, searching mine for something he couldn't name. I'm afraid, Isadora. Of what? That I'll become something even you can't love. My breath caught, but my voice didn't break. Then I'll love you harder, louder, until you remember who you are, who we are. He kissed me then, not like a man claiming, but like one unraveling. There was no urgency, no dominance, just two souls holding on in the quiet after the storm. I led him back inside, undressed him slowly, touched every scar like a prayer, reminded him that love isn't just light. Sometimes it's the hand that finds you in the dark and doesn't let go. We didn't speak again that night. We didn't need to, because I felt it in the way he breathed against my skin, in the way he finally let go in my arms. This wasn't the end of him. It was the beginning of us. I said it without warning, without trembling, without fear. I love you. It slipped out in the space between heartbeats, in the hush between one breath and the next. He had just finished dressing, his back turned, the buttons of his shirt half fastened, his posture perfect even in stillness, and I stood there, wrapped in nothing but morning light and the weight of knowing, I love you. 3 words that felt too small for everything I'd built inside me, but too heavy to hold any longer. He didn't move at first, didn't speak, just froze in that sharp, beautiful way only he could, like time paused out of respect. When he turned, the look in his eyes was not surprise. It was devastation, quiet and full. As if I had cracked something open in him he'd worked too hard to keep sealed. He walked toward me slowly, each step deliberate, his expression unreadable. "Say it again," he whispered, voice low, as if he didn't trust the echo. "I love you," I said, softer this time but with no less fire. His hands found my face, warm and trembling. Lucien D'Angelo, the man who commanded armies, who tore empires down with a single glance, touched me like I was the only truth he'd ever believed in. "You shouldn't," he said, not to push me away, but to protect me from something inside himself. "I'm not built for this. I'm carved from violence. I was never supposed to be someone's home." I reached up, brushing my thumbs over his cheekbones, anchoring him. Then let me be the storm you rest in. Let me be the place you choose, even when it hurts. His mouth met mine in a kiss that felt like surrender, not to me, but to hope, to the idea that maybe he didn't have to survive alone anymore. Later, we lay tangled in silence, skin to skin, breath to breath. I rested my head on his chest, listening to the steady rhythm he once claimed didn't exist. "You're not a monster," I said. "You're a man who's never been loved without condition." He exhaled like the truth had weight, like it settled into him bone deep. "You made me want more than survival." I lifted my eyes to his. "Then want me. Choose me. Not because you're afraid of losing me, but because you believe you deserve me." He cupped my face again, eyes fierce, voice raw. "I do. God, I do." And there it was, the shift, the fall. The moment we both stepped off the edge, not as captor and captive, not as sinner and salvation, but as equals. As two people who had bled for power and crawled through ruin only to find something soft, something reckless, something holy in the arms of the other. I had told him I loved him, and he had chosen to believe it. That was the real victory, the one neither of us had planned for. It didn't end with blood, it ended with silence. The kind that settles only after something has finally fallen. My father was finished, not by force, not by fire, but by something more elegant, erasure. Lucian had orchestrated it all with brutal grace, removing him from every circle, every whisper, every shadow of influence until he no longer existed in the places that once trembled at his name. And I watched it happen not with vengeance in my chest, but with something quieter, closure, the kind that doesn't roar, it exhales, soft, final. We stood together that morning, in the house that had once been a cage and now felt like a throne room. Lucian at my side, dressed in black, every inch of him calm, controlled, dangerous in the way only peace can be after a lifetime of war. He looked at me then, really looked, and said, "He has nothing left." I nodded, slow, deliberate. "Neither do I." He stepped closer, fingers brushing mine, eyes searching for something deeper. "Do you feel empty?" "No," I whispered. "I feel clean." There was a knock at the door. One of his men, quiet, respectful, handed him a single folder. No words exchanged, just a gesture, a nod. Lucian opened it, scanned the contents, then handed it to me. Inside, the final piece, my father's resignation, a full confession, the surrender of every asset, every illusion of control. He hadn't fought, he hadn't begged, he had vanished, as if he finally understood that the world no longer had room for men like him. I closed the folder slowly and handed it back. "You did this for me?" Lucian shook his head. "No, I did it with you." Later, we drove through the city, windows down, wind soft against our skin. The people outside had no idea what had shifted, but I did, and so did he. He reached across the console, took my hand, held it like a secret he didn't want to share. "What happens now?" I asked. He smiled, barely there, but real. "Now we stop surviving." I leaned into him, my voice soft against the hum of the road. "And we live?" He brought my hand to his mouth, kissed my knuckles slowly, reverently, together, and in that single word, I felt the weight of everything we'd endured, the pain, the power, the transformation. We hadn't just ended something, we'd built something in its place. Not perfect, not gentle, but real, ours. And for the first time, I didn't feel like a possession, or a weapon, or a ghost in someone else's war. I felt like a woman who had been seen, chosen, loved. Not for what I could offer, but for who I had become. And beside me, the man who had once ruled shadows now held the light with steady hands. Not just for me, for us. Oh, ChatGPT Duce. He didn't ask with a speech. He didn't kneel with a flourish or gather a crowd to witness it. Lucian never needed spectacle to make something sacred. He waited until the night wrapped around us like silk, the fire casting slow gold across my bare skin, and the only sound in the room was our breathing, deep and steady, like we'd finally found the rhythm we'd always been chasing. He was seated across from me, shirt open at the throat, sleeves pushed to his elbows, a glass of something amber forgotten on the table beside him. I was curled into the chair opposite, legs folded, hair loose, wrapped in one of his shirts, and nothing else. The kind of intimacy that wasn't loud, wasn't rushed, it was lived in, earned. He watched me for a long moment, the corner of his mouth tilted in that way he rarely let slip. Then he reached into his pocket, slow, like it wasn't a ring he held but a decision. No box, no words rehearsed, just a black band resting in the center of his palm. Not delicate, not glittering, something bold, sharp, undeniable. like the love that had carved its name into us both. "Marry me," he said. And it wasn't a request, it was a vow. A truth he'd carried for weeks, maybe longer, waiting for the quiet moment where it could finally breathe. I didn't answer at first. I just stared at the ring, at the man, at the life that had unfolded around me like something violent and holy, something I never saw coming but somehow always needed. My heart didn't race. It settled. My breath didn't stutter. It deepened. And when I stood and walked to him, barefoot on hardwood, I didn't say yes. I took the ring, slid it onto my finger, and whispered, "You already have me." He exhaled like I'd just handed him a future he never believed he deserved. And maybe I had. He pulled me onto his lap, arms locking around my waist, his mouth brushing against my neck like a promise only I was allowed to hear. "You're mine," he murmured, "but not because I own you, because you chose me." I ran my fingers through his hair, soft and slow, and said the words that mattered more than vows. "And I'll choose you again, every day, even in the dark." We didn't celebrate that night. We didn't call anyone. There was no announcement, only the sound of fire crackling, of skin finding skin, of love spoken in every touch and silence. And somewhere between his mouth on my shoulder and the warmth of him sinking into me, I realized this wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of us, of peace, of the kind of forever that grows not from perfection, but from surviving the wreckage and still reaching for each other through the smoke. The day we married, there were no violins, no cathedral, no hundreds of eyes watching from velvet seats. There was only dusk folding over the hills like a blessing, the scent of pine in the wind, and a silence so thick with meaning it felt sacred. We stood beneath a canopy of stars, on the edge of the estate, where the woods met the stone, where the world we built began and everything before us finally ended. I wore white, not for innocence, but for defiance, for rebirth, for the version of myself that had survived, endured, and still chosen love. My dress clung to me like a second skin, silk and strength wrapped in lace, a quiet echo of every scar I no longer hid. Lucian stood across from me, dressed in black, hands steady, eyes locked on mine like nothing else existed, like I was the beginning and end of every choice he'd ever made. There were only a few people there, people who mattered, who knew what it had cost us to arrive at this moment whole, and yet it still felt like the world had paused just for us. No priest, no script, just him, me, and the fire between us that had never gone out. He took my hands, warm, calloused, familiar. "You saved me," he said, voice low, reverent, "not from death, but from myself." I squeezed his fingers, my eyes burning with truth. "You gave me back my name." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the ring, not the one he proposed with, but one forged just for this night. Dark metal, clean lines, a single stone set deep, like a secret only we shared. He slid it onto my finger, slow, deliberate, and I felt the weight of it like a crown. I didn't need to say I do. I already had, in every moment I'd stayed, every night I hadn't run, every breath I took beside him, trusting the man who once terrified the world and now knelt only for me. I placed his ring on his finger and leaned in, our foreheads touching, breath mingling in the hush before the kiss. When our lips met, it wasn't for show. It wasn't even for celebration. It was for survival, for everything we'd bled through to earn this softness, this safety, this peace. When we turned to face the others, his hand never left mine, not once. And as the night unfolded around us, glasses raised, firelight dancing, laughter blooming soft and rare, I let myself lean into him, into the warmth of his body, the certainty of his vow. We had walked through hell to get here, and now, with the stars above and the future ahead, we were no longer just lovers, no longer just survivors. We were husband and wife, and this time, I said yes with my whole heart. They call me his wife now, but that word feels too small for what I am. I am his equal, his calm, his storm, the hand he reaches for before war, and the mouth he kisses after. Time has passed, but not in the way people expect. We didn't settle, we expanded, together. The mansion no longer feels like a fortress. It's a kingdom now, not because of the land it sits on or the power it represents, but because of the way he looks at me across the breakfast table, the way he rests his hand on my lower back when we walk through the halls, the way silence between us has become a language of its own. He doesn't rule alone anymore. He never will again. People whisper about me. Some call me dangerous. Others call me the woman who softened the king. They're wrong. I didn't soften him. I sharpened him differently, taught him that power can hold hands with peace. That strength doesn't always roar. It can breathe. It can love. I attend the meetings now, not as a figurehead, but as a voice. And when I speak, they listen. Because Lucian does. Because he built this empire in blood, and now he lets me hold the map. There's a new rhythm to our life, still sharp, still precise, but lined with something warm, something earned. The house echoes less, the light lingers longer. We eat dinner together more often than not, sometimes in silence, sometimes in laughter, sometimes just watching each other like we're still trying to believe this is real. And maybe we are. Maybe we always will be. Because loving each other hasn't dulled the edge. It's made us more dangerous, more whole. I catch him staring at me sometimes, when he thinks I'm not watching. His eyes softer than they ever were before me, but no less fierce. Like he still can't decide if I'm the salvation or the sin. And I love that. I love being the question he's never finished answering. He touches me differently now. Not with hesitation, but with reverence. Like every time is the first. Like every moment is a vow renewed. The world outside still spins. Deals are made. Enemies rise. But I don't fear it. Not anymore. Because whatever comes, he'll face it with me. Not in front. Not behind. Beside. Always. And when people say his name now, they remember mine too. Not because I demanded it, but because I earned it. In blood. In fire. In silence. I didn't just survive. I ruled. This is what they don't tell you about love born from darkness. It doesn't stay quiet. It evolves. It grows teeth. And when it's real, when it's chosen every day, it becomes something unbreakable. He is mine. I am his. And together, we are no longer just part of the story. We are the ones who write the ending. He was born on a rainy morning, the kind where the sky feels too full and the earth too quiet, as if the world is holding its breath for something sacred. I remember the moment they placed him in my arms. Warm, small, so impossibly real, and everything inside me stilled. Not with fear, not even with wonder, but with a kind of knowing I had never felt before. He looked up at me with eyes too deep for something so new, and I swear they carried a piece of Lucian's fire. A quiet fury, wrapped in peace. I named him Calum, Latin for sky, because he came from the storm, because he made the world feel open again. Lucian stood beside me, hands blood-streaked, jaw tight, eyes wide with something no enemy had ever pulled from him. Awe. He didn't speak. He just stared at our son like he couldn't believe something so pure could come from hands like his. I watched him fall in love without a single word, and when he finally looked at me, voice barely a whisper, he said, "You gave me a future I never thought I could touch." I reached for his hand, placed it over our son's chest. "You're holding it now." The days that followed moved differently, softer, slower, not easier, but fuller. Calum slept curled against my chest, his breath the quiet rhythm I didn't know I needed. And Lucian, this man forged in shadow, became something new, still sharp, still dangerous. But now, when he walked through the house, it was with a different purpose. Protection was no longer about territory or control. It was about us, about the little life that had turned our empire into a home. Sometimes I catch him holding Calum like he's afraid to break him, like he's still learning the weight of something he didn't know he deserved. He sings to him at night, low and off-key, songs in Italian his mother used to hum. And when he thinks I'm asleep, he whispers stories into our son's ear. Not about power, but about choice. About becoming a man who fights for something more than survival. A man who loves without fear. And I know, deep in my bones, that we are not finished. That this love, this family, is still unfolding. There will be more mornings like that one. More names whispered into soft skin. More fire carried in tiny hearts. I can feel them already, waiting. I think back to the girl who said no at the altar, who was sold, who was silenced, and I want to tell her everything, about the man who would choose her, about the life that would bloom in the ashes, about the child who would carry both their names like a crown. But most of all, I'd tell her this: love doesn't save you, it remakes you. And if you're brave enough to stay, even when it hurts, even when it burns, you'll rise from the wreckage with something no one can ever take again. Everything. Thank you, truly, for being here, and for listening all the way to the end. Your presence means more than I can ever express, and every little interaction, whether it's a comment, a like, or even just a heart, fills me with gratitude. It might seem small, but each one helps this channel grow, reach more hearts, and share more love. If you're not yet subscribed, I'd love for you to join us now and keep listening to more stories together.